Iraq remains one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the impacts of climate change, and Rudaw, of course, continues to shed light on those impacts in different areas of Iraq and also to share awareness regarding what needs to be done. In this interview today, I will have a chance to discuss that with one of the highest international community representatives in Iraq, Mr. Oak Lutzman, resident representative of the United Nations Development Program in Iraq. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this interview.
Well, thank you for having me on and the opportunity to talk about this very important topic.
I will start by one of the most obvious questions to begin with. Iraq is the fifth most vulnerable nation in the world to the effects of climate change, and that is according to the UN researchers. How many people in Iraq you think that will be affected by climate change impacts?
Well, if you look at it across the board, I think everyone in Iraq will actually be affected by climate change. We see that now, of course, very profoundly in the lack of water in the rivers, but climate change have a much more impact than just the water situation in Iraq. We're also talking about higher temperatures. We're talking about a loss of biodiversity. We talk about sand and dust storms. We also see how the lack of electricity is also affecting a large part of the population just because, the water is not coming through in sufficient quantity. So if you look at it from the broader perspective, climate change has an impact globally, but as you pointed out, Iraq is one of the most vulnerable, countries in the world to climate change. And therefore, if you look at it from that perspective, everyone in Iraq will be affected one way or another.
Mr. Lutzman, do you expect climate change-induced migration from South and Central Iraq to the Kurdistan region to increase?
Well, I think at the moment where the problem is the most acute is certainly in the marshes, in the marshlands in Iraq. I mean, it's, as you know, it's one of the UNESCO World Heritage Places. It is really a symbol of Iraqi history and culture. At the same time, with the rising temperatures and with reducing water and also the higher salinity of water in those areas, it has really had an impact on the livelihoods of people living there. And it has caused a good number of people there to move to the cities, to Basra or elsewhere, to find a livelihood that they were lacking in the marshland. So a very important element. As UNDP, we're also trying to do something about it. We're working together with the government and other UN agencies to set up programs to support the population in the marshlands, both to deal and adapt to climate change, but also to see how we can help to improve the livelihoods on the ground to be able to continue their lives in this very important area.
As the UN, what efforts have you witnessed as UNDP from the Kurdistan regional government and the Iraqi federal government to curb the effects of climate change?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very important to see as part of the overall national development agenda spearheaded by the Prime Minister that climate change has been determined as one of the big priorities of Iraq going forward. So that's a very important step to recognize the problem. At the same time, it is also clear that more needs to be done. And therefore, as the UN, we are working very closely together with the government to further develop the policy, also to access climate financing, and to develop actual concrete programs on the ground to deal with this impact of climate change.
Yeah, and what projects and programs is the UNDP specifically working on to curb the effects of climate change in Iraq and the Kurdistan region as well?
I will mention a few, I think, some very exciting programs. First of all, we are supporting the government in terms of its negotiations with the neighboring countries to deal with the water inflow into Iraq in terms of both rivers, right, the Tigris and the Euphrates. But at the same time, it's also very important, for example, to deal with the internal water management in Iraq as well, so in terms of water supply, but also water consumption. So we've been very busy helping the government to further develop water treatment plants, for example, to make more potable water available. Also in terms of improving irrigation systems in the country, so to have a more efficient use of the available water to maintain agriculture and improve agricultural production. And also working with the private sector in the industrial area, particularly when it comes to oil exploration, to make also sure that water that's being used for for oil production that is also used in a more sustainable way. So therefore, that the overall water quantity, is improved for use in Iraq. Other things, I also was talking about biodiversity. I think from our perspective, biodiversity in the country is a very, important element to maintain, and therefore also we're working in the marshes, but also elsewhere to maintain biodiversity in the country. And when it comes to sand and dust storms, we're working both here in Iraq, but also with the neighboring countries to see how we can curb, the rise of sand and dust storms in the area. It has a huge impact on the economy, and therefore working on green belts, planting trees, cleaning up the rivers. This is also very important activities that we're currently deploying with the support of the governments.
Mm-hmm. What about the green economy? The UNDP regularly talks about green economy and clean energy. What projects do you have for Iraq and Kurdistan region from that aspect?
It is very obvious that going forward, green growth is a very important policy element for Iraq. In the long run, diversification of the economy away from the big dependence on oil is going to be very important. Now, therefore, stimulating, for example, the use of solar panels is a very important element of this green economy. We're working very closely with the central bank, actually, here in Iraq, to allow citizens to have access to financing to deal with their electricity issues, particularly to the purchase of solar panels. This is an initiative that is still under development, but we're very confident that this, in the short term, will be another tool for Iraq to move towards a greener economy away from oil, and also, in terms of employment, really have a great number of green jobs that are associated with green growth.
I have one question about poverty rate in Iraq. Last year, the Iraqi Planning Ministry estimated that the poverty rate in Iraq was around 24%. Has the UNDP in Iraq conducted any research on poverty in Iraq and Kurdistan region as well?
Well, this research is actually ongoing. From the UNDP side, we're working with the government to not measure only poverty in terms of income per head of the population, but also measure income in other areas. For example, the distance to a health clinic, the access to education, or the access to clean water. So a more comprehensive way of measuring poverty in Iraq. We want to do that at least at the minimum at the district level, so that also when it comes to targeting population to help them to deal with the poverty issues, that we can do it in a more targeted way, and really looking at those areas that need the most support. We expect that the results of this research will be available in the course of early 2024, which hopefully will also help both in terms of allocation of government budget, but also in terms of support from UN projects in those areas to support particularly the poorest people in Iraq, so that at the end of the day, when we're moving forward towards a green economy, that nobody is left behind.
Let's talk a bit more about the marshlands. Also, you have mentioned them priorly. On September 17th, you announced a joint project in partnership with the Canadian government and Iraq's Water Resources Ministry to help the communities located near the Iraqi marshlands in south and to preserve the biodiversity and the fragile ecosystems of those marshes. Do you think that those marshlands can survive the effects of climate change, and can people continue living in those areas, or will they be forced to leave and to be displaced?
Absolutely, I do believe that we can do a lot, both in terms of mitigation, adaptation, to help the population to remain, in the marshlands, and really help them to maintain their livelihoods in that area. The joint project with the government of Canada, I think, is a very important component. It deals with, the supply of potable water, with drinkable water, but also with improving livelihoods and with maintaining biodiversities, as you mentioned. But I think at the same time, it's also true that much more needs to be done. This is a large area that needs a lot of support, and we're looking forward to first work with other governments as well, but certainly also with the government of Iraq in terms of developing the policy, but also for financing and scaling up the projects that are currently running in those areas.
Another topic is your project regarding tourism in Kurdistan region. On July 30th, you announced the roadmap project, a groundbreaking program to revitalize the Kurdistan region's tourism sector. Do you think the Kurdistan region is a suitable destination for tourists from other countries, for example, from Europe and US and others?
Thank you. That's a great question. I've traveled many times through Kurdistan, and both as an official for the UN, but also as a tourist. You know, it is really a very beautiful area. I think that is very suitable for tourism. As you pointed out, there is a roadmap to improve tourism from tourists from outside of Iraq. I think this is very important to build on. I think it also depends, of course, how in the future the situation in Iraq will be developing. But we have seen a constant, increase of numbers of people who are coming into Kurdistan, in the Kurdistan region, to really enjoy, everything that Kurdistan has to offer in terms of natural beauty, hiking, food and cultural experiences. So, I'm very optimistic about, the future for Kurdistan when it comes to the tourism sector. I think it is also incumbent on the government in Kurdistan to further develop the tourism sector in terms of improving services, in terms of hotels, the roads and what have you. But I think a very important start has been made. And as we said at the launch, we are ready and to continue working also with the government in Kurdistan to really work on this, because of course tourism has a huge impact on the economy in terms of an influx also of hard currency and people spending money in the various areas in Kurdistan.
Mm-hmm. Do you work on empowering and developing women and the youth of the Kurdistan region and Iraq? Do you see any progress in this field?
Well, I think it's very important. First of all, we know that the population in Iraq as a whole is a very young population. And therefore, youth employment is a key, I think, element in terms of leading Iraq on a path to peace and prosperity. Working, therefore, on a green economy that really can absorb, this big number of young people into the economy and have decent jobs is a very important tool and an important objective for us as the UN, but certainly also for the government. So it is really tying in also with the idea that, the private sector development as part of a green economy is really important. And it is also true, I experienced that in many countries, that, it is very difficult to develop an economy, to develop a country also without empowering women. At the end of the day, it's half of the population. And therefore, empowering women and really have them part and parcel of the development of the country is absolutely important. I think we hear both from the federal government and also from the government of Kurdistan that this is a priority. And certainly also from the UN's perspective, we are ready to support. We also have a number of projects running both in Baghdad and in the Kurdistan region that are supporting these objectives.
And do you think that there are any differences in the women and youth situation between the central and southern Iraq and the Kurdistan region?
Well, I don't know about differences, but I just see that in general, I think we signal that these are one of the issues that really need to be worked on. And again, absorption in the economy of both groups is youth in general, is giving a young population, but also certainly the women component is absolutely important. So, it's for us a priority, it's for the government of a priority, and therefore, we're working together in all places in Iraq.
But a large number of youths from the Kurdistan region and Iraq often seek to migrate out of the country, mostly towards Europe. What do you think is the reason for this issue, and do you have any projects in that regard?
From the UNDP side, first of all, we are not an agency that is, mandated to deal with migration. As you probably know, this is the International Organization for Migration, IOM, in the country. When it comes to people moving out of Iraq to other places, it's usually for many reasons. It can be family reunification, it can be about education, it can be about economic reasons. So it's hard to say, but I think, you know, what is more important here is that really we focus on what is happening in Iraq and how we can really improve the situation for people to really make a livelihood, a living, and have a future in Iraq itself.
Yeah, and that was my...
you know, as UNDP is concerned,
Yes.
we are focused on that. Yeah.
That was my question as well. How do you support the people of Iraq, the youth of Iraq, and make them realize that in their country they have an opportunity to live on, to not to migrate and put their lives and their loved ones in danger as well?
Absolutely. And I think from where I'm standing, you know, I find it also very important to engage, for example, with the various universities in Iraq, you know, where you have so many students looking for an education and a future, right? And therefore, you know, raising awareness of the opportunities, but also, you know, trying to increase those opportunities for youngsters who have so many hopes and dreams for the future inside Iraq is very important. So I think in the past we have done less of that, but currently we're really scaling up our engagement with the various sort of academic institutions in Iraq to really also, you know, have that exchange, you know, with young people and help them also to orient them on what the opportunities actually are. And also supporting the universities themselves in terms of, you know, improving education and the skill sets of all these young people who are, you know, moving into an age where they're looking for jobs and families and what have you.
On July, your agency addressed the need to reintegrate ISIS families into the society, and Yazidis in Shingal feel threatened by the return of those families. What has the UNDP done in terms of radicalizing ISIS-linked individuals?
Yes, so as part of our stabilization work in Iraq, and this has been going on essentially since 2016, we've been working with ISIL-affiliated families, you know, throughout the country, wherever we find them, with the purpose of trying to reintegrate them into their communities. We call that social cohesion. You know, basically we're working, mostly women and children, but also with their communities, to see how they can return. And, you know, in doing so, we're working with especially the local authorities, but also tribal leaders at checks and so on, to really ensure that there is a community acceptance of people coming back, first of all. Secondly, whenever people returning to the areas they came from, we're also supporting the community themselves, you know, to facilitate this reintegration. What is also, I think, really important is that, you know, post-traumatic counseling and so on takes place really to also help people to go through their experiences and help them to reintegrate into those communities with, you know, in a more productive way. And I think we've built up experience and best practices across these last couple of years, and I think by now we can say, you know, we have a very successful program running in doing this kind of sensitive work. Mm-hmm. And lately we've also been involved in, for example, the reintegration component of people returning from the Al-Hol camp in Syria as well, basically based on the same principles. And in doing so, we're working very closely, of course, with the Ministry of Migration and Displacement, but also with the security actors in Iraq as well, to make sure that, you know, people also have the required security clearance and what have you to be able to be reintegrated.
And what kind of support do you provide for Iraqi IDPs residing in the Kurdistan region camps?
It is important to note here that, of course, the UN as a whole provides support, you know, to the IDP population in the Kurdistan region. As UNDP, we do not work in the camps, so this is a very important element to understand. We are really involved in the reintegration process. So when people leave the camp and return to their home or another place of resettlement, and this is where we provide the support in terms of repair of housing, livelihood, ensuring that the places where they go back to have sufficient basic services in terms of water and electricity and, you know, health and education, so in terms of availability of schools and so on. So this is really the work that we do. There are other UN agencies that are really involved in working in the camp itself and supporting the population that way.
Mm-hmm. Right, as we have also noticed, the support of the UN organizations for refugees in the Kurdistan region has decreased. So what does the UNDP currently do for Kurdish refugees from Syria, Iran, Turkey, who live in Kurdistan region provinces and especially in Mahmur camp?
Well, exactly, because, you know, as UNDP has United Nations Development Program, we're a development agency. So there are other UN agencies who are involved in support to refugees. For example, UNHCR and IOM are the ones really who are providing that kind of support. So I cannot say that we're doing direct support, you know, to refugees themselves, but what we do provide support to is really support to the host communities, wherever we find these refugees. So that's a bit the division of labor we have currently in the United Nations system.
Yeah, Mr. Og Lutsma, resident representative of the United Nations Development Program, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all so much for watching.